Police in the Western Cape are investigating two mass shootings in Mitchell's Plain. Yesterday, at least 4 people were gunned down and 1 wounded in Tafelsig. Less than 2 days before that, there was another shooting, this time in nearby Beacon Valley. 2 people were killed in that attack. The communities have been rocked by gang-related violence over the years, but there's no confirmation at this stage that gangsters were involved in the attacks. Dr. Guy Lamb is a violence and conflict analyst with the University of Stellenbosch, joining us now live to talk more about this. Good to see you guys. So the immediate reaction from the families in Mitchell's Plain yesterday was that their family members were not involved with gangs and that they don't believe that their killings were gang-related. Does this look random to you?
Well, I mean, we're speculating at this particular point in time, and even though the families, the unfortunate incident here where the persons lost their lives, it might not be in gangs, might not have been involved in gangs, but the situation still might be gang-related in the sort of sense that gangs will obviously engage in violence against other gangs who they're competing with or have some sort of conflict with. But also if they're looking to assert their authority within a particular area, they'll use violence against residents in those areas, against members of the public, but often they'll target their violence if there's certain individuals who play important leadership roles within a community. Gangs might target them because they see them as a threat to their authority. Sometimes gangs use violence as a way to really sort of indicate to residents that you have to take us seriously, you have to listen to us. If you don't give us money or protection money, that there will be consequences, and consequences may be injuries and deaths.
And just on that, without of course saying that these were gang-related attacks, why is it that the gang networks in areas such as Mitchell's Plain have been able to flourish for decades, really, given that every year, every quarter, police speak on how big of a crisis it is in the Western Cape?
Well, I mean, the gang issue's been with us since, it's been with us for more than 300 years, and it sort of ebbs and flows in the Western Cape, and certainly in Mitchell's Plain. During hard lockdown and shortly thereafter was actually sort of murders went down, and then recently have increased in recent months, certainly in the last quarter of 2020 and what we're seeing now. And I think what COVID's done is really kind of made life difficult for gangs and for organized crime, as it has for the rest of the economy. And so it's become a lot more competitive games, and as a result, gangs are competing a lot more intensely with each other. So we're seeing killings as a result of that, and also we're seeing scores being settled, and this has been going on for a very, very long time. And what's been happening is also there are significant numbers of weapons that are in circulation and that enable certain gangs to compete with each other. But in terms of responding to this, we've got an anti-gangsterism strategy at the national government level. We've got the anti-gang unit in the police, but it's such a massive problem that we really need more than just a policing response to this. We really need to be thinking about what's driving violence in the Western Cape, and that actually starts in families. It's with young men who are exposed to very high levels of trauma, and then they drop out of school, and often they start hanging out with other violent men, and that leads them into gangs.
And just, Guy, we're losing you slightly, but I want us to persevere for a moment. I'm glad you bring up the issue of the young men who are part of these gangs, because we're hearing cases of more and more young boys, essentially, in their mid-teens being killed in gang violence. Some saying, look, some of them venture out to commit crimes and to sort of prove themselves among the network of gangsters in the areas where they live, right? But the anti-gangsterism strategy that you've pointed to, does that speak to the intricacies of how, in particular, young men are drawn into this web?
It does, not in such a nuanced way, but it certainly is aware of what drives gangsterism, what perpetrates gangsterism, what perpetuates gangsterism. And it does try, the idea is to bring together other departments within government. So it's Department of Social Development, Department of Health, Department of Trade and Industry, because there is a kind of an economic angle to all of this as well. But the problem is it largely becomes a police-driven strategy. And with the police-driven strategy, it's about visible policing, it's about arrests, it's about using a hyper-militarized approach to deal with the gangs. So it's really dealing with the symptoms and dealing with the actual criminality without actually addressing what the determinants of gangsterism is and gang violence in particular.
There's also the breakdown then in confidence between communities and police officers. Some members of the SAPS said to be working or being on the payroll of these gangsters. So how much can the honest officers get done when communities are wary of reporting gangsters?
Well, I mean, it depends. In some areas, the relationship is quite good. In other areas, it isn't. And, I mean, this is a problem of gangsters corrupting police officers or mutually beneficial relationships across the world. You see it in other high crime areas as well throughout the world. So it's not common to South Africa here. In the sense of the relationships between the police and community members, it's the relationship can be there, but often it's around community members not wanting to kill gangsters because there will be consequences. So there have been incidences where people have been killed because they have stood up to gangsters and reported gang-related violence to the police, and the consequences have been that they have been killed or injured, or family members have been hurt as well. So it's more than just the police here, it's also the larger criminal justice system, as well as people not necessarily feeling protected or safe. So this is kind of a complex issue.
From what I'm hearing then, you're saying there is no easy fix to the problem?
No, not at all. I mean, there is a policing option that's being pursued, but of course there's long-term solutions to dealing with endemic poverty and lack of economic opportunities for young men in these particular areas. And of course, with COVID and the impact that it's had on the economy, we're not going to see much change there. But we need to start really thinking outside the box. And one of the things that we're not pursuing is to thinking about gang mediations, because we can't necessarily deal with the problem of gang violence in the short term, but we can try and stop gangsters killing each other or killing members of the community. And often it's about trying to mediate between the different gang leaders. And, religious organizations have played roles in this regard in the past, and so have civil society organizations. And there were kind of gang truces that happened under hard lockdown and may have had an impact on this kind of violence. But at the moment, I think the relationships between gangs is very tense at the moment, and that's why we're seeing lots of violence happening, lots of mass shootings happening, also gangsters moving in on other gangs' territories, trying to take over businesses. So without trying some sort of mediation process, we're really not going to get anywhere at the moment, certainly in the short term.
Dr. Guy Lambs from Stellenbosch University, good to speak to you. Thank you. Still to